It's wonderful having you all here. I think we had a brief round of introductions, but I think a lot of other folks joined later on. Uh, a brief about myself. I'm Pranay, and I have worked for 5 years working in mostly robotics, 3 years working in surgical robotics, and 1 to 1.5 years working with autonomous vehicles, foundational models. And then for the last, I think, 5 months, something, I've been working with conscious engines in the AI research team. And when I joined Conscious Engine, so I know Kautuk personally, and we were discussing. So we guys were working on a product called Felix, which was basically like a personal assistant kind of thing for your iPhones. And one of the problem statements that we were really discussing and exploring was, can we actually run the models locally and like throughout the day, because you don't need to invoke the agent as Sagar mentioned. If it would actually be a very nice thing if you could always have it running, so which is a key factor for proactive agents, right? So it gets all your data running around, and like from your Gmail or all other tools like Slack and everything, and then it gives you like personalizations and all that. For any proactive agent, I think the key part is running the model locally and sustainably. Not sustainably, sustained, which means that, yeah, the inference is basically keeps on running. Don't need to invoke it. So it's a very small study that we did. It's an ongoing study where we really wanted to explore whether sustained load, inference load, can actually run on smartphones, and then if it can run on smartphones, or if it cannot run on smartphones, then what are the alternate devices that we should like try to see. So this is a paper that we published, like more of an experimental finding. We're working on it further to get it into a production, like not a production, to a publishable state, into a conference or something. But basically, we wanted to check that, and we selected a couple of devices. Uh, yeah, so this is the study and why we were doing it, and these are questions that we wanted to answer. Like if the inference can run on mobile phones, is it sustainable? Is it sustainable for the entire day? Is it sustainable for 1 hour, 2 hours? And if it is not sustainable, what is the bottleneck essentially? So that we can then analyze it and like try to figure out a way with which we can run it locally. So when I say locally, it could be either on a smartphone, and if you could have a separate device that you have, dedicated device with you always, that runs the agent locally, and then it can coordinate with your smartphone or something to get like relay information. So these are the four platforms that we selected. Primary was the Galaxy S24 Ultra and the iPhone 16 Pro, because we wanted to check both platforms. And we took the RTX 4050, my laptop, just as a baseline of that model. How, like, if it is not bottlenecked, what performance can we actually get? So we used Quen 2.5 1.5B instruct. We quantized it to 4B because we wanted to fit it in these small RAM form factors. And we took a standard prompt, summary prompt, which was about 258 tokens, plus minus, I think, one for one of the platforms. And we wanted to check if we can run that same prompt in a conversational style. So you give a prompt, the answer, and then like you give another the same prompt again, and then it appends the context window basically. So that's what we wanted to try, and we wanted to try it for a couple of iterations so that we can simulate a sustained load. So we selected 20 warm iterations, which means the first iteration we discarded. We did that because that includes a lot of model loading time and all that for the prefill. And then we discarded that, and 20 warm iterations we benchmarked basically all these and compared these four platforms. So yeah, so these are the four different formats that we got for the models. And iPhone 16 Pro, we used MLX 0.29.1 for the experimentation, and we ran it on the metal, not on the ANE. So, and these are the parameters that we measured. Initially, the study was more focused towards performance, which is basically decoded tokens, decode time, throughput, all those things. But we figured out, as I'll explain later on, that thermals are a big problem if you want to run any models on iPhones or any edge device for that matter. So then a peak power came into question, how much power consumption is happening, because that directly affects how much battery you're consuming from the device. And then the thermal state, because thermal state as figures out that we figured out that thermal state is directly impacting how your GPU is throttled in the devices. So, and battery drain, obviously, because if you want to run a model 24/7, it's going to drain your battery completely. But how much does it drain? So that was the question. And these are the results that we got. I'll link the paper to the at the very end. You can go; it's on archive. You can go and check it out. But this is more or less the results that we got. RTX 4050, as expected, we got a very good throughput. Not extremely well, but I mean doable. And the mean variation was also decent compared to the iPhone and the S24. Average power, so the laptop was battery powered. I disconnected the AC cord so that it is more indicative of an edge device, but not really. But yeah, so it was capped to 24 watts, even though there's a 75-watt envelope for the model. And this is the amount of token energy per token, 297 millijoules per token that we got, which you can compare with the others also. And so Hilo 10H NPU is something interesting because in these studies that we did not really find any benchmarks for Hilo 10H because it was a very new model that was launched in, I think, January mid or something. And very limited infrastructure available on Hilo 10H because Hilo 10H uses its own Hilo Olama application layer, and only about 5 LLMs are supported in that. So if you want to run any other model, you have to first compile it with their compiler, and then you have to basically convert that model into their format, which is an HEF format, executable format, and then you need to run it, which was it's a very long and tedious task, which was also one of the reasons why we selected the model because it's natively supported by Hilo. Uh, Hilo results were actually very interesting because even though it's got very less throughput compared to the other devices, it sustained that throughput through the entire run. And it took almost 1 hour to run the 20 iterations in that. And a variation was very less in the throughput. And the power envelope was also very, very standard, very uniform. No thermal throttling was noticed whatsoever. And like I'll show the graphs later on, but everything was very, very uniform. And power consumption was just 1.87 watts, so that was very, very less, which is very interesting because for sustained load to always run a model, you need like more like stable flat performance than like jumps peaks performance, like sporadically. So that is better, but at the same time the throughput is very less. So if you want to run tool calling, for example, sustained, so that gives you very slow performance if it's a user facing product. iPhone 16 Pro, interestingly, was 40 tokens per second, but we did get thermal throttling very significantly after the second or third iteration itself. So peak in the first iteration was about 40 tokens per second, and then third or fourth, then the thermal throttling started hitting. Then it was about 23 tokens per second. It settled down very low, and then it was stable for the rest of the time. So we did not notice any significant degradation in that, but at least it was flat. It degraded the performance, but it was flat. S24 Ultra was the most difficult to work with. We used, I think in the previous slide I mentioned, we used MLC LLM for that, and we used TVM to run the models on the S24 Ultra for the Adreno GPU. And S24, we actually had to do 2 runs. So actually, the paper that you find in the archive, this is from the previous run, in which we had very severe thermal throttling after the sixth iteration itself, and the OS governor floored the frequency to 231 megahertz, and that's the very baseline for the GPU to run. So it basically hanged the entire system. We could not process any further iterations after 6. So that is what is published in the paper as well. But recently we also did another iteration for that. A couple of changes that we did was pre-fill chunk size we reduced. It was uncapped before. Then we capped it to 128. So the 258 tokens is basically being split up into 128 plus 128, so that like we can get better thermal performance. It does increase the pre-fill time to about 90 seconds, which is a very high time. But also the thermal requirement, the energy requirement becomes a little lesser because thermal spikes are lesser if your prefill is split out more over time. So, and one more change that we made was display was completely off. Display was taking a lot of power to run, and this is the only way we could get S24 to actually run flat, more or less flat. So, and complete 20 iterations, otherwise just stopping. So these are the graphs from the results. As you can see, RTX 4050, the GPU temperature and the throughput are inverse. So, but still doable. S24 Ultras, if you can see, the throughput is more or less flat, and the temperature is also more or less flat, only because we were able to do that with the display off and the prefill chunk size fixed. S20 iPhone 16, if you see, the green zone in this is actually the only normal thermal condition. Everything after that was warm and hot. So the throughput directly halved when the thermal throttling hit. So, and high-low again, very, very flat, very stable performance all over, although the throughput was very less. Thermal throttling is basic. This is basically the combined graph of all the four platforms with thermals, and the only thermal throttling that we noticed was in iPhone 16. I think there could be some workarounds. It's an ongoing work, seeing if there's any way to fix it, maybe uh, f- like we fixed S24. But a note with S24 is that if you have to turn off the display and if you have to get a very high prefill chunk size, then it's probably not usable for for it working in an app. So this is the best performance that we could get, and yeah, this is the energy per token. Obviously, the RTX 4050 will have the highest, but RPi 5 was more or less good enough. The energy consumption was less, which was a positive point. But I think, uh, like for an edge device, 7 tokens per second is like very low. So yeah, these were the findings. I think I've already explained this. Yeah, so thermal management actually is the primary factor, and we're bounded by that, and not the hardware compute of the like more smartphones. Maybe S25 and S24 both. Thermal throttling is the biggest factor, even an iPhone. So this is what we found. It's an ongoing work. We're working on more devices. MLX implementation. This particularly, you can just go through it. Just because you guys are MLX people, so I just thought I'll just add a few details of how we implemented MLX. And so there's an LLM evaluator, which is basically running the .swift, which is running the benchmarking service for the app. And yeah, and then there's a UI. Basically, it's like an app. You put the prompt, and then it generates the response, and then you'll get the benchmarking results as a CSV later on. Uh, yeah, I think I've already explained this. Anything? Yeah, so battery level, everything we got from this. Battery level also, I think, dropped. Not mentioned here. Yeah. So battery level for all the devices dropped around 10% for the entire iteration, and which is not ideal, because if it's just 1 hour, 20 iterations, imagine running it for the entire day. You'll have to charge your devices very fast. And yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done on this more to get it into a conference ready paper, because this is a gap that sustained load is not very well studied over a long time. This is what we found. If you guys have seen anything, please feel free to like let us know. And yeah, so we used a very small model, and it was an instruct model. A tool calling model would be more indicative of a proactive agent, like an assistant, and maybe trying to study that, doing the same study with a tool calling model, for example, running locally, would be actually good. And one of the biggest drawbacks that we faced of this study was the framework, because all of these devices have completely different frameworks. Each framework adds its own overhead, adds its own complexities to the problem. So we wanted to isolate the problem statement as much as we can to the hardware itself. But this makes it a big challenge for that, because there's no homogeneous standardized framework for running all across the models, because even the CPU architecture is very different. Raspberry Pi is an ARM 64, and other devices are like different. So that is a big problem. If someone can come up with that a unified framework, that's a good contribution in itself. And power management was also a little bit of a struggle for us, because in S24 specifically, we had to get the power ratings from the GPU's internal power current sensors, we could not get it from the battery unit directly, which is more indicative of how much the device is consuming actually. And same for other platforms also. MLX, as far as I know, it was very difficult for us to get power rating, power draw from that, how much the device is actually consuming power from the battery, which is a very important factor for this study. And yeah, so one other limitation is that this is just 20 iterations, 1 hour, without spacing. Uh, but I think a longer study is more indicative of a proactive agent, a sustained load. It was difficult for us because it was taking so long, but I think, yeah, we need to expand into more number of iterations, longer study hours, something like that. So yeah. Uh, in the study that we did, there was also one paper I think I mentioned here. Okay, I think I deleted just slide. So one paper was trying to do the same study, but it was spaced out. So they were doing just 5 iterations. They were switching on the device and then switching it on, and then closing all background services, and then 5 iterations. And between each iteration, they were restarting the power cycling the device, which is why I think doing a sustained load study is important, because that is not indicative of how a sustained load device will run on a proactive agent, right?